Good to see all of you. And gosh, it was great to see Jessica. I've worked with her on a lot of things over the years. NAR and Florida Realtors work pretty closely together on a number of things. And yeah, I do have a lot of the data she was mentioning about Florida that I've brought with me. So why don't we get right into it? Jessica talked about inventory, and nationally, the story is that inventories are rising significantly over the last year. The percentage is double digits change. But in most of the country, inventories are not back to pre-pandemic levels. Well, if you look at the Florida data, that's not necessarily the case. In Florida, there are many parts of our state that actually have inventory levels currently that exceed pre-pandemic levels. We've got a lot more inventory, though, pretty much wherever you go. There's only a couple of exceptions, but substantially more inventory now. As of the end of August, Florida has about 50% more single-family inventory than it did a year ago, and about 75% more condo inventory. Okay, so that's a significant increase. But we are coming from a very low point. So let's talk about maybe the potential causes here. Jessica mentioned a couple of the theories that are out there: the silver tsunami, or the Airbnb bust, or why are we seeing all this inventory? I can tell you that one thing my team has been doing as of late is we're taking MLS data, looking at what's being listed, matching that with tax roll data, so we can find out the age of the structure. For condos, we're looking at that too. As you all are aware, we have the recent condo legislation that has caused some consternation in certain parts of the state. So we're looking for, okay, are the age of the buildings being listed now, are they significantly older than maybe 5 years ago compared to the housing stock that's not being listed? And we're not finding a huge change there. Predominantly, we're seeing slightly older condos being sold and listed now than before, but the housing stock has aged in a large part too since 5 years ago. So not seeing much of that. We've used any public data we can get our hands on. We've used voter records to approximate how old people are in certain houses that are being listed, and we're not finding a difference in the age of people listing compared to 5 years ago. People are about the same there. So a lot of these theories, there might be some truth to them, but there's no one single reason why inventory is higher than it was last year. We can look at the condo reserves requirements. That's not causing new listings to ramp up. That's what a lot of the articles will hint at. They'll say condo inventory is up. It's because of a flood of condos coming onto the market. I'm going to show you the data that says we're not seeing a flood of condos coming onto the market. The short-term rental market could go bust. We could have the silver tsunami. My favorite explanation is, of course, things are messed up there. It's Florida. That's the one you see on social media the most. That's a lazy excuse. One of the reasons why Florida Man exists is because we have some of the most transparent public record laws in the country, so it's easy to get your hands on, any kind of report about someone who's done something stupid and been arrested for it. But another reason, it could be Florida, is because they hate us for our freedom. Here's active listings at a statewide level. I've broken it up to single-family homes and condos. So there you can see it's somewhat similar to the one she showed you at the nationwide level, but you've got, you can definitely draw a line across where we're at now and see that single-family home inventory is roughly where it was in that pre-pandemic 2014 to 2019 period. And condo inventory actually a tiny bit above where it was. That's where we're different than the rest of the country. The rest of the country hasn't gotten back to that pre-pandemic level yet. But we're not, look at the left side of the chart. A lot of these people are saying that inventory is up, therefore housing crash. Housing crash happens when you look at the very, very left side of this chart. That's the kind of inventory you'd need to see flood the market to see real significant price declines. Not that you're not starting to see some price reductions and things, but if you want to crash the market, you're going to have to do better than just adding back to the inventory we had prior to the pandemic. You can look at this in terms of months of supply, and if you go by that 5 to 6 months of supply rule, which you shouldn't if you live in Collier County and work here, because your month's supply should be higher because you're a luxury market. But if you're going by the 5 to 6 month supply rule, then anything above that is a buyer's market, and anything below is a seller's market. Then you could say, arguably, that in Florida, condos and townhouses are in a buyer's market at large, and we're still in a seller's market for single family, but it's close. Bottom line is it's definitely a little bit brighter for buyers than it was, but we still have our problems. So let's look at it by county. This is each bubble here represents how many active listings we had at the end of August by county. I hope you guys know where your county is. I can point it out. It's right there. Geography, United States, we get made fun of for that too. Now I'm going to light it up and show you, okay, this is how much your inventory changed from 1 year ago. So August 31st, it says July, but that's a lie. It's August. I just forgot to change the word on it. So as of the end of August, I don't see anyone down. Everyone's up by quite a bit. That's the number that's going to grab a headline. Oh my God, our inventory has doubled. Just like we will see, oh my gosh, the foreclosure rate has doubled. If the foreclosure rate doubles from 1 to 2%, who cares? Right? So you'll see a lot of headlines if the foreclosure rate goes from 1 to 2%. Oh my gosh, we are, back in 2010, our foreclosure rate was 12% in Florida, right? That's a big foreclosure rate. Same thing with inventory. Inventory has gone up, but from a low base. Now, one thing I would like to show you is, okay, that's compared to last year when we had really low inventory by historical standards. Why don't we make a comparison between what our inventory is now and, let's say, 2019, right before the pandemic started? Because that's when the market was last normal. If we do that, then even though that graph I just showed you shows that statewide we're back to our pre-pandemic level of inventory, it's not evenly throughout the state. Really, the counties that are holding down most of these counties actually have significantly higher inventory than they did pre-pandemic. That's real data. The only reason our statewide inventory isn't higher is because of Miami-Dade County and Collier County to a degree. And then, there's a couple smaller counties over on the East Coast too, but this is where we still actually see less inventory. This is the only part of the state where we're really seeing less inventory than we did prior to the pandemic. Up in Lee County, up 27%. Now, I know for a fact there might be some new construction leaking into the MLS data there. That's part of why we have more, but if you want to even go by zip code, I don't have the percentages on here, but orange means lots more inventory than a year ago. So throughout most of Southwest Florida, that's from Lee County down to Marco Island. And then compared to 5 years ago. Other than central Lee County and obviously the islands, the barrier islands out in Lee County have special circumstances, but through most of, Bonita all the way down through Collier, wet coastal Collier down to Marco Island, we have less inventory than we did a year ago. So it's not necessarily isolated to one area, or this is versus the pre-pandemic. So less inventory than pre-pandemic through a lot of Collier. So let's look at this. This is not a hurricane spaghetti model. This is new listings by year. So each line, each color is a single year. That's so you can see the seasonality in new listings, where it's typically pretty high starting out in Collier County for the year and then dips in the summer. And then vacation season starts again and it starts to lift up. And then on the right side, I've got annual new listings, so you can just see it for yearly totals. Let's focus in on last year. Last year was actually kind of an anomaly for most of the state in that it was actually a low year for new listings compared to recent years. Here in Collier County, or next door in Collier County, we had pretty typical new listings numbers. And here's 2024, where apart from January and February, we've pretty much tracked with the 2023 level of new listings. Obviously, that's a big gap in January and February, but besides that, it's been pretty much tracking the same. I'm going to actually change the right-hand side, so instead of looking at annual new listings, let's look at year-to-date, and that way we can put 2024 in there and compare it, because we don't obviously know what new listings will be the rest of the year, but to this point, we've had 10,000 new listings in Collier County. That includes single-family, condo, and townhouse. And that's significantly more than last year, primarily because of that strong January and February for new listings. Okay? But look across all the years that I have on this chart. Remember during the pandemic when we kept saying, we don't have any inventory. There's no one listing. Actually, about as many people listed during the pandemic as normal, right? It's just that the homes sold in 3 seconds. So when you would go check, okay, how many homes are on the market? There would be none, because they were already gone. But if you look at 2024 so far, our number of new listings is the same as our pre-pandemic years, 2018 and 2019. Where I do see difference, and by the way, I can go back to Collier. I could show you single family by itself, and I could show you condo by itself, and it's the same pattern, which is why I didn't put it in here. Condo listings are about exactly the same as they were 5 years ago, and so are single-family listings, which is why your overall number of listings right now is lining up so closely with those pre-pandemic numbers. If we're worried about the condo issue, then we would expect, what all these articles are saying is that, condo inventory is exploding. Well, where would we find that? Well, let's look at Lee County. This is the Lee County data, and you see here that Lee County new listings are actually up this year relative to pre-pandemic. And that's actually more of what most of the state looks like, is that we've got elevated new listings this year. If I just show you the townhouse and condo data for Lee County, though, you can see same thing all the way across. So where we actually have the excess new listings for Lee County is not townhouses and condos. The excess all comes from single family. We've had about 5,000 to 6,000 listings every year consistently for townhouses and condos in Lee County. So how is inventory going up? And yet, new listings aren't appreciably up that much. Well, that's because inventory is mistaken often as a supply indicator. Inventory is not a supply indicator. Inventory doesn't tell you what supply is. Supply comes from stats like new listings or new construction. Inventory is more like price, in that it is a cross between demand and supply. It's determined by both. Inventory goes up when you have a new listing, but it also goes up if you pull a listing off the market. Or it goes down if you pull a listing off the market or if the listing sells. So demand can pull down inventory, right? So inventory is kind of the cross between supply and demand, just like price is. So I already explained, one way you can have a higher inventory is if homes take longer to sell. If they're not selling in 5 seconds, they're more likely to be counted in inventory. That's starting to happen. You're seeing median time to contract, or median days on market is what your MLS is going to call it, is going to that's rising back to pre-pandemic levels. It's not quite there yet for single family, but for condos and townhouses, it's getting there. So that's one way you can see an increase in inventory without, even though we haven't had a substantial increase in new listings. Same thing in Lee County. Actually, Lee County's got a little bit higher for condo. Now you can see, okay, we might have some higher inventory in Lee County because condos aren't selling as fast. And that's because we probably have some people who are stubborn about price reductions who want to list, or maybe are just not that motivated to sell, but are listing. You can also look at price reduction. One way we do it on our stats, but there's many ways to look at the data. You can count the number of price reductions or count the percentage of homes that had a negative price change versus a positive. One thing we do at Florida Realtors is look at, for each home, what percentage did it sell for relative to its original list price? And then we find the middle number out of all the homes that sold. So, recently those numbers have been around 93, 94%, meaning, the closed price was about 94% of the original list price. Historically, we're going to be in the low to mid 90% range on this statistic. It obviously ballooned during the pandemic when you You could make up any price you wanted and list price you wanted, and the house would sell. But now it's not. We're seeing price reductions. That's a little concerning because it's a change in direction. But the prices that among the closed sales we're having relative to the original list price, we're not seeing a huge difference yet, right? Look back during the housing crisis of the 2010s. If you start seeing them that low, then that's a big concern. You can look at the same thing with Lee County. Now, Lee County, we're starting to see a little bit of a drop with condos again. So always important with median data to be careful, though, because you want to make sure that it's not just because of a different class of housing is selling more than it used to. So something to be a little concerned about. So the stories about condo inventory, if you're seeing it anywhere, are right to a degree that there is more inventory now, but it's not because of a flood of new listings. It's because what is being listed is not gathering enough interest, and it's forcing price reductions or sitting on the market longer. So it's actually a demand side issue. If to the extent that the condo legislation is affecting people's behavior, it's on the buyer side. Buyers are being more tentative and a little more careful when looking at buying a condo right now, and they don't want to get themselves into a situation. Where you guys can help is do research for your buyer, like read the minutes of the condo association, figure out, ways you can, these are all excellent ways to assist a buyer and show that we are more than people who look up listings for you on the MLS, right? So do a little research, know your condo associations and what's going on there in terms of handling the legislation and, wherever we are going with that. Maybe we're going into a special session and the rules get changed. I don't have any inside information on that yet, but let's look at sales. Collier County sales. This is where our inventory issue is coming from. So where we're getting more inventory in a lot of the state is partially because of higher new listings, but it's more so because sales have been so depressed. And so stuff is sitting on the market longer, and that's raising our inventories. You can see our sales compared to last year are pretty similar in Collier County, but they are below where they were in 2018 and 2019. So far this year, there have been 7,000 closed sales, and we were at above 8,000 in both 2018 and 2019 by this point in Collier. Over in Lee, somewhat similar story, although we are actually a little ahead of the 2018 and 2019 pace now. The only thing I can explain that with is just how much housing has been put in the ground in Lee County, which we're a state that builds. Our previous speaker, Jamie, talking about what was his nope, nothing, not on planet Earth. We're not generally a nope state. We're actually a pretty building friendly state, and obviously he runs into frustrations every single day because there's a never ending list of things that can go wrong when you're trying to put construction in the ground. But relative to other states, we build a lot here in Florida. We're pretty lucky to have that. That's helped keep housing affordable to this point. But we are running into problems with affordability, so it's urgent now more than ever. But besides nope, the one I use is banana. Have you heard that one? That's build absolutely nothing anywhere near anything. That's the California term that I've borrowed. Now you're seeing also in Lee County, and this is where a lot of the Lee County inventory is coming from for condos, is just, again, lower sales. So again, part of that, it's kind of unfair to analyze this area because we're still, in some parts of our market down here, we're still recovering, right? I mean, we haven't forgotten about Ian down here. There's a constant reminder, where you go. So everywhere you go. So part of it is that, but also I just think there's a hesitancy about getting into the condo market right now because there's been so many negative headlines that have been partly misleading. But there's a lot of reasons why demand overall is weaker this year. I know I'm very depressing. I'm getting you ready for Elliot, who will probably stage dive at some point. So be ready, Bill. High mortgage rates. This was already covered by Jessica, just showing you the Fed rate versus the mortgage rate. This slide to tell you the green line being the Fed rate. She already covered it. the orange line actually anticipates what's going to happen to the green line and moves first. That's what's happened here. The reason why rates didn't drop after the Fed announcement is because everyone predicted the Fed announcement was going to happen, so the market already adjusted for it. So optimistically, I think we could get down as far as 5%. I would also tell you very optimistically that there's a 99% chance I'm wrong, because there's nothing economists are worse at forecasting than what interest rates are going to be a year down the line. I could, Goldman Sachs or the big banks, Wells Fargo, or these giant think tanks in Washington can employ hundreds of forecasters who cost a lot of money, especially to employ them in that market, and they can give you, a quarterly forecast for what the interest rate will be. It is always wrong. I've only got a team of 4. I'm using your dues money, so I figure, why would I want to spend my time forecasting something that if they can't get it right, I won't get it right? So, that's not how I spend my time, being wrong about what interest rates are going to be. I will give you, just my range. Lawrence Yoon, by the way, I don't know if Jessica shared this. I wasn't paying attention at that part of it, but Lawrence thinks we're kind of capped. Our floor is 6%, and that's because he's a deficit hawk, and the deficit does, there are issues there that could keep the interest rate up there. I think we can get a little below that. Jessica referenced the spread of the 30-year and the 10-year Treasury, which is historically high for what it normally would be. You can see how the 10-year Treasury, the blue line, is a lot more closely aligned with our mortgage rate, the orange line, than what we saw with the Fed rate that is manipulated. That's a short-term rate. So I would plan for that. And I agree with Jessica. We shouldn't make any proclamations that we're going to see rates below 5%. If we do get to that point, that's because something horrible has happened to our economy and the Fed needed to grease the wheels again. So we just need to, basically we're in a holding pattern. We've got to wait for incomes to catch up to where housing prices leapt to a couple years ago. Until then, we're kind of in a holding pattern where we're going to see lower sales, but prices are going to be fairly steady. I'm going to skip this rest of this mortgage rate part because she covered it, but I'm showing you basically the same data. On the bottom here is a different way. She was showing you what income you'd need to buy a home in this area or in the U.S. overall. I'm showing you on the bottom chart what your estimated payment would be on a 30-year fixed mortgage, 20% down, which again is bigger than most down payments, but just for consistency's sake. Just another way to look at how affordability has eroded. On principal and interest only, the typical Florida home purchased in 2019 would be about $1,250. I've inflation adjusted it, so it would have been less than that. And now it's well over $2,000. That's just a huge, and that's not even accounting for property tax and your HOA fees and your insurance. So it's just a tough pill to swallow. Rising property insurance rates. It's been pretty amazing to see how fast property insurance rates have gone up in recent years, and it's hard to put our finger exactly on the cause because a lot of the data and information by these insurance companies is a trade secret, and they have their own strategies. Either they've completely changed how they calculate risk and have decided that Florida is much more at risk than they used to think. That could be one reason. But look at how many Florida hurricane landfalls we've had. It's not, over time, generally, we're actually seeing less landfalls per decade by hurricanes than we do now. Although I would say we're not even halfway through the 2020s yet. So, I haven't even added Helene to this yet. And if you just look at major hurricanes, the kind that really, can trash your property, it's been fairly even, but it's lopsided data. Look at the 2000s. I think all 5 of these hurricanes were in the same consecutive years, 04 and 05. So it's kind of spotty. We had 4 Cat 4s hit us in the 1940s. I think it was in consecutive years. So we obviously would like Helene to dissipate or just disappear off the planet, and it sucks that our state's going to get hit. From an insurance perspective, this is the best place for a hurricane to hit. And I hate to say that because there is no good place for a hurricane to hit. But here I added the just value of every property in every county, and I subtracted out the estimated land value, which is not really a very scientific way of doing this, but it basically kind of tells you how much does property outside of land, how much is it worth in each county. And the place where it's projected to hit is the part of the state that has the lowest, value that needs to be insured. And just this hurricane comes up this way. It comes up along the coast. We know very well down here that just a slight deviation when it's coming up parallel to the coast can mean absolute disaster. The hurricane only has to move a couple degrees to the right to hit, let's say, Fort Myers instead of Tampa. We learned that the hard way. Whereas if it's going straight at the coast, a deviation a little bit left or right is still going to end up putting the hurricane in the same place. If it's coming along the coast, it could dramatically change where it comes ashore. We're lucky with this hurricane in terms of, again, insurance, that it's going in this direction. If it had deviated a lot more, there's a lot more property that could be destroyed. And again, heart goes out to everybody from Cedar Key up to Apalachicola who are in the path of the storm. It's not looking good, and I hope that it's not as bad as they think it could be. Tallahassee was my home for many years, so I'm worried about them. Rising property insurance rates, obviously, so we may be avoiding something that could have been far worse, but this is going to bring the spotlight back onto property insurance in Florida. Beyond hurricane forecasting being difficult. By the way, it's kind of a hobby of mine. I'm really, since I was like 6 years old, I've been fascinated by hurricanes. And as an economist, I want to figure out why the meteorologists are more accurate than I am. So I've studied their models some. Now their track forecasting, like figuring out where stuff is going to go, is still like scads better than it was 20 or 30 years ago. Where they're lacking is intensity forecasting, so they can kind of tell where the hurricane's going to go a lot better than they used to. But they're not going to know how strong it is. Like that rapid intensification stuff that's been happening recently with Michael and Ian. Ian was this close to being Cat 5. That's something they're not as good as predicting. They're trying to work on it. But the thing that meteorologists are worse at predicting is how many hurricanes will be during the season. They are always way off on that. Remember, we were supposed to have like 50 hurricanes by now, and we're only on letter H. So that one, never trust that one. That one's always wrong. But that doesn't mean that they're always wrong about everything. They're just always wrong about how many hurricanes there will be during the season. So we've had fewer hurricanes than anticipated, but I just showed you by decade, it's hard to predict how many hurricanes you're going to have. It does not seem correlated with the temperature of the Earth, although that's, I'm sure, a factor. Now, remember, the temperature of the Earth affects not just the sea temperature, it affects the air temperature. Different air temperatures, this is a physics lesson now, different air temperatures are going to change air pressures. It's going to change wind patterns, is what I'm saying. That wind flows from high pressure to low pressure areas. So it could be that hurricanes get worse because the sea is heated up, and yet maybe they're all getting blown in a different direction than Florida going forward. I don't know that. The meteorologists know that. None of us are experts on this. I would hope the insurance companies hire some of the people who are so they can accurately assess risk. But the other issue that Florida insurers have had is we are one of the most litigious states in the country. In fact, up till recently, we were, 8% of property insurance claims each year. We were 80% of lawsuits involving property claims nationally. So less than 10% of all the claims, but those generated 80% of the lawsuits. A lot of loopholes there. The legislature did close that, right? They closed those loopholes. The only problem with when they closed it, everybody went and sued right before it went into effect. So we have a backlog now of lawsuits. So it actually hurt the insurance companies in the short run. But in the long run, this is going to bring back more competition in the insurance industry. We hope some of the bigger insurers, we're seeing some signs that that's already happening. Currently, the only headlines I see about insurers leaving a state are about California right now. But I'm not seeing that for Florida. I'm seeing stories about some insurance companies deciding to move back into Florida. More competition is good. It's going to help keep rates from going higher to the extent that they can. So at least we have that to look forward to. But it's not like an overnight drop in insurance rates is in the cards. We can only hope to slow down the growth. Let's see what time it is. Okay, I'm almost out of time. So rent growth has slowed down. You always weigh between buying and renting for most buyers, and they're going to, if rent growth has slowed, because rent growth was really skyrocketing, just like home prices were there for a while, it's going to change your calculus a little bit. You might be a little more inclined to rent now. We've already talked extensively about condo reserve requirements, how I don't think that's leading to a flood of listings. What it's leading to is buyers being more reticent, and thus those that are being listed might be staying on the market a little longer. And in-migration has slowed. I'm going to go through this one pretty quickly, but in Collier County, as of the 2023 data, 2,500 people in 2023, or 2022 to 2023, 2,500 people moved to an owner-occupied home in Collier from abroad. About 9,500 moved from another state. A little under 5,000 moved from another county in Florida. And a little over 8,000 moved to an owner-occupied home from elsewhere in Collier County. So just a reminder, I actually talked about this with Rick Fioretti, one of the last times I saw him, how we like to focus on people moving from another state or from abroad, but just remember there's also a lot of potential buyers within your very county, right? 8,000 there last year. Now, you've seen a lot of migration data from our previous two speakers. The only problem with that is that it's outdated. I think a lot of that came from 2022. So if you want to see something more recent, Florida Realtors has been collecting data on private license exchanges. You move to Florida, you change your old state's license in for a Florida license, and they write down which state you came from, and that's where this data comes from. So it's your local tax collector's office forwarding the data to the Highway Safety and Motor Vehicle Department in Tallahassee. That's statewide. I've got by county. This shows your biggest feeder counties year to date for this year in terms of if we're just going by who changed a driver license in. And you can see Illinois and New York are clearly the two largest states, feeder states for Collier County. That's historically been true. If we compare that to where we were at this point last year, though, we're seeing a lot less people moving in, or at least exchanging licenses than we did previously for most of these states. The only exceptions are Texas, Arizona, and some of the in Tennessee, and looks like North Carolina, and then some of the smaller states in the South. But the Rust Belt and the Northeast, we're seeing significantly less. That's a trend we're seeing everywhere. We were never going to maintain the rate at which people were moving from the Northeast or California, in 2021 during the pandemic when those places were largely closed. The people most likely to move have already moved. They are still, staying here and telling their friends. I think we've generated more demand to live in Florida than we had pre-pandemic. It's been a very positive story nationally. But obviously, we're not at the rate we were. Now, if we want to compare where we are now compared to 2019, this is a habit that I have of looking at 2019 right before the pandemic and comparing it to now. It's just those Rust Belt states primarily and some of the northeastern states where we're seeing less, but we're still seeing 27% more New Yorkers exchanging licenses. We're seeing a lot more Texans. We're seeing a lot more folks from the Pacific Northwest, and even still 8% more Californians than we were seeing before, right? So basically, people are still moving from places that are high priced. They've got a lot of home equity because they're coming out of markets where they've had high income and a high home value, so they can afford our market still. That's where we're seeing people. People like, from Ohio, where I'm from, we're not really going to be able to afford Naples at this point, nearly as much as we could before. So, Lee County, by the way, pretty similar numbers, although down even from New York. This is my only international slide, and this just shows you the general trend we've seen, is that going into the pandemic, we've never seen such a small percentage of sales in Florida be by international buyers, and that doesn't appear to be improving. In fact, I can't even get you guys to answer my survey that I've already emailed you 4 times about. We've only got about half the responses, so you're going to get more threatening emails from me over the next 2 weeks. We're going to try to get a few more responses. We are still, by the way, 20% of all foreign buyers in the U.S. are buying in Florida. So Jessica's data isn't that wrong, but and obviously here the Latin American buyers are primarily concentrated in Miami-Dade. Here it's all about Canada and Western Europe, but mostly Canada. And Canadian buyers, just from what I've seen in the data and from anecdotal evidence from you, just seem not to be as interested as they were pre-pandemic. That's fine because, again, New Yorkers have more than made up for all of the foreign buyers. So, and Californians. Job growth I'm going to go through really quick. If you annualize how fast our rate of jobs was growing from 2019 to 2023, then about each year, Florida grew the number of jobs in Florida grew by about 2.2% versus nationally it only grew by less than 1%. So this is going from 2019 to 2023 on an annualized basis, including the period where we had all those layoffs and then came back. You can look at healthcare, finance and insurance. We're really outperforming the U.S. there. You think about all those finance jobs coming down, and scientific, technical jobs. We're talking SpaceX, all those kinds of things, and the professional jobs. Unfortunately, that means more lawyers and economists. But that's great. Now look at the last year, though, our change. We're seeing more growth in healthcare, but the U.S. has surpassed us. They've got jobs to make up there. Employment growth, we're about where we were, but the rest of the U.S. is catching up. And these higher paying jobs, growth has really slowed to a halt there. But that's happening nationally too. Rates were so high there for a period, it's not like the banks were saying, let's expand. I mean, maybe that'll happen now that rates are coming down. So I'm going to skip through these, but it just shows you which industries we're gaining jobs versus the U.S. versus which ones we're not. There's no real big story there to tell. We already talked about millennials, so I'll skip my list as to why millennials are facing a difficulty. The last one, lack of basements in parents' homes. That's what Jessica won't tell you, is that her analysis failed to recognize that we don't have basements to put our millennials in. So where do you put them? The lanai? Just to generally communicate where prices are for Collier County, including condos and single family and everything, home prices are pretty much, kind of in a holding pattern over the last 3 years, ever since rates went up. That's what you would expect. Inventory has risen. The demand for homes has declined because of that. But you still have to take into account that you guys had an 88% median sale price increase. I think that's one of the highest of any county in our state, easily. If you look at Lee, that's 5-year growth, but really all of that growth happened in a 3-year period. That's only 65%. Only 65% compared to Collier's 88%. And statewide, it was only 56%. So a lot of the price growth down here in Florida has been in Southwest Florida. You're just going to pay for that, and that it's going to hurt, how many people can afford homes down here, and it's going to limit your customer base. It's a trade-off for dollar volume. I'm not going to say anything about commissions. I never do. But I am going to say that this is correlated to your earnings, right? Is how much money is flowing through the housing market. And You can get dollar volume to go up in two ways. You can have more sales or you can have higher prices. Both of them work, okay? So right now, I'm just saying turn that frown upside down and be thankful that prices are holding, even though the sales aren't where they used to be, because that's still generating more dollar volume than we saw in 2018 and 2019 by a long shot. My time is up. I told you you were going to need a taser. So let's just leave with that thought as I walk down the stairs, because that's the other reason I have this mobile microphone. I thank you for attending, and I appreciate your time.